Mini episode 1359 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1359. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris here, and we have back on with us FDH Hoops Analyst / FDH Lounge dignitary, my old friend Ben Chu, coming back on here to break down the 2021 NBA Finals. And this is now the seventh time that the Finals have come and gone. This is going back to 2015, where Ben has, on this show, correctly forecast the NBA Finals. The first 4 years of that run, he and I got it right all 4 years. Those would be, of course, the Cavs-Warriors years, which means that, again, we both went out on a limb in 2016, picked the Cavs to win it. We were right on that. The other three were kind of easier picks. And last year, I would say Lakers over Miami was kind of an easier pick. But much like 2016, in 2019 and 2021, Ben went the other way, and he went against the grain. So 3 times out of 7, at least, he seriously went against the grain and got it right, including this year. I was among the many who did not with Phoenix, not least of which because, again, none of us really thought the Greek Freak would be in any condition to do what he did during the finals. I think I'd have picked Phoenix probably even if I knew he was going to be at full strength, so I'm not going to fall back on that as an excuse, nor am I going to use that to begrudge Ben. 7 for 7, my man, and an unbelievable success rate and probably something that nobody else out there can claim. Congratulations.
You see, now, Rick, I now finally get to etch my name next to Harry Connick Jr. for his Super Bowl predictions.
That's right. Right.
For lengthiness and timeliness of it. But, again, if you even go back into the podcast, you can even say that the logic I even dictated was incorrect, but it ended up being correct at some point anyway. So, it doesn't matter how the prediction pans out. It's just all that matters that you're correct.
And as somebody who was a documented 55.4% on all NFL games last year on the show, I say to you, welcome to the stratosphere, my good friend. But that's the kind
you
of...
You realize 55.4 is not that high, correct, Rick?
Dude, that's a 3% success rate on all games in the NFL for the year. I mean, that's every freaking game, buddy. That doesn't happen. So, you know... don't begrudge me my place in the stratosphere, man.
Every coin flip can always be right 6 out of 10 times. That's all
I was flipping a lot of coins, buddy, but they came up the right way. And 55.4. By the way, speaking of stats, before we get into this to any kind of serious degree, as far as any kind of questioning about whether Milwaukee has a big three or not, the new league champions, and I think a lot of that would fall under, is Drew Holiday, somebody that would fall into that. There is something when you look at this Milwaukee roster that is much more akin to what we see in Major League Baseball when you talk about the concept of platooning, because if you look at it statistically, and this is one of the longer names in the league, Milwaukee has a franchise center by the name of Brook Lopez Bobby Portis. And Mr. Brook Lopez Bobby Portis had 23.7 points per game and 12.1 rebounds per game this past season. So that long-named gentleman right there certainly could be part of a big three or even big four.
I mean, the real question, too, as we've discussed during the entire season, is Major League just the Bucks, or was just that team that always kind of had this consistency in terms of underperforming in the playoffs?
Right.
And it kind of showed that, again, some of that sort of issues they had with mental toughness prior in the past didn't really exist in this timeline. But in the overall just composition of the roster, I mean, that's essentially why they gave up all that draft capital and Eric Bledsoe for Drew Holiday and what he was able to accomplish with them during the run. Well, let's not forget that Giannis, his overall numbers were insane and amazing, but Drew Holiday pretty much in 2 of these games made game-changing plays that essentially put them into this position to begin with. So
I agree with that.
I think the whole Big 3, Big 4, Big 2 notion has kind of been overrated commodity anyway, because we've seen it multiple times in timelines of other NBA champions where you can have one legendary player but have 2 really good players, and it's good enough at the end.
Well, exactly. And that's a thing where you look at it, and I think a lot of us coming into the finals would have said that Phoenix had probably built to the point of having a big 3, with the third piece, of course, being DeAndre Ayton. Nobody would have really questioned Booker and Paul coming into this, but Ayton, the way that he had elevated his game, especially through the playoffs, and yet you look at it, and I wonder if that was perhaps a little bit hasty. Through the first 2 games in the finals, make no mistake about it, he was a huge component of Phoenix jumping out to that lead. But one way or another, and yeah, there might have been some questionable whistles in the course of the next 4 games, but he had a chance to prove that he's definitively a part of a big 3 there, and I think that chance might have come and went.
Right, and I think, if we're being honest about Phoenix, I don't want to put all this on Chris Paul or DeAndre or Devin Booker. It just kind of felt like Phoenix had a very good opportunity in Game 4 of the series to go up 3-1 and pretty much close the series out in Game 5, and they were unable to do that in that pivotal Game 4. And it just kind of felt like the way the series was going, and this was a comment that a close friend of mine here in Portland made to me while we were watching these games, that in Game 1 and Game 2, the margin of victory for Phoenix was sizable, but it didn't feel like in Game 1 or Game 2 that Phoenix really blew the doors off of Milwaukee. And we went back into the matchups during the regular season. Both games were hotly contested and combined at a margin of 2 points in the point differential. So
that's right.
It's very hard for me to get any sort of. It feels more like the analogy I would make is it felt more like Milwaukee took control and won this series more than Phoenix kind of collapsed and ran out of gas at the end of the day.
Yeah, it is interesting when you look at it, the games that Milwaukee won, the way that they really kind of pulled away. And, of course, Game 4 stands out as the epitome of that, the way that the Suns had a chance to take that 3-1 lead and it got away. That said, and you and I had talked about this, I think it was an ESPN article talking about series over every 5 years. We've had an epic series, and I don't know if we necessarily call this one epic, or at least on par with 2016. I wouldn't quite put it there. But the one thing is, Game 4 of that series, I'll tell you what, as a Cavs fan, that was an epic kind of letdown by the Cavs. And, of course, to fall behind 3-1, thus setting the stage for, I'll say it, the Warriors to blow a 3-1 lead. But that next day, I remember that game was on a Friday night. On a Saturday, I made a point. I was going to the store. I was running errands. I was wearing Cavs gear. I didn't see one single person anywhere wearing Cavs gear. This is 10 days before the parade, mind you, when there would be 1.3 million people. I mean, so there were not there at the parade. So there were not a lot of believers after the Cavs blew a 3-1 lead, but they believed in themselves enough. Or after that, I'm sorry, they fell behind 3-1. It's the Warriors that blew a 3-1 lead. Freudian slip. But anyways, one way or another, Phoenix just didn't have that same element within them that the Cavs did 5 years ago, because it really seemed to suck the air out of the balloon when they let that game get away.
Yeah, and I think also more, too, it wasn't necessarily even Game 4, it was more Game 5, in my opinion, where
that too.
It kind of looked like they had an opportunity, as we all remember, like if Devin Booker doesn't lose, it takes that jump shot probably a little bit earlier in the shot clock in the fourth quarter of that game. They had a chance to go up by 1 or 2 points and really force Milwaukee into a final possession, but then Drew Holiday had that steal to end up in that Giannis one attempt at the rim. It just felt like to me, and this is the question that I've always kind of had with a Chris Paul run team, is that Chris Paul is one of the greatest point guards that I've probably seen in my lifetime. But for some reason, it just seems like when the playoff lights get bright, whether it's strategy by his opponents or other sort of coalescing factors turn into play against him, it just kind of feels like Chris Paul just cannot get to that next gear that I think a lot of guys can get to. And again, this is not a shot at Chris Paul, but this is just a general consensus that I kind of feel like that Chris Paul is a fantastic Hall of Fame caliber guard, but he just doesn't have that little extra sort of bit that kind of will end the series at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true, sadly enough, and I think Devin Booker is still growing into being that kind of player, which kind of left them at a crossroads here. But yeah,
I mean, one thing I will note too, Rick, is that I'm not saying that Chris Paul is a bad player and not a Hall of Fame player or anything along those lines.
That's clear.
It just feels like there are times when if Paul is forced to either be the number one option constantly or he's getting constantly double teamed, which the Bucks did constantly in the series in Milwaukee. It just felt like to me that Paul and the Phoenix Suns just didn't really have an answer for it at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, they counted on him to such a large degree that, yes, at any point in time when he wasn't going to be able to come through for one reason or another, that was going to be very, very injurious to their chances. And again, you and I, and this has been primarily off air, we've had some very epic debates over a period of time on the laws of probability and how things play into handicapping. I did text you early in Game 5 when everything was going Phoenix way, but I don't think they were even up 20 points. And I was like, I'd be nervous if I was Phoenix because you should be up more than this. And when the shots stop falling, are you leaving yourselves open? And to me, that's exactly what happened. They didn't have a big enough lead built up when they couldn't miss their shots. And then later on, when they couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat, Milwaukee just kind of, raced into there, made it a game. And it was an epic finale the way that it came down to there in the end. But I'm going to hold to my guns on that one there, that had Phoenix had a bigger lead once the laws of probability turned around and the shots stopped falling, I think they might have been able to hold them off.
I mean, to be honest, Rick, I don't really even count Game 5 as a game they really choked away. Game 4, they had I believe, unless I'm mistaken, an 8-point lead with about 3 minutes to go in the game.
True.
And I would, if you're going to point to a game, in my opinion, Game 5, that was a coin flip scenario that happens. But if you're up 2 games to 1 and you have an 8-point lead with roughly 3 minutes to play, I think really great legendary championship teams know how to close that door and end the series. And it felt like that every time Phoenix would get close to ending it, Milwaukee would bounce back and play well. And you have to give the Bucks credit. Giannis was pretty much unstoppable for the final 4 games of the series. And a lot of the guys who have been much maligned during their careers, guys like Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Brook Lopez, pretty much did their job in these pressure situations that helped them essentially win the series.
I mean, listen, if I was happening to be in Milwaukee these days and feeling contrarian, I'd sit there at a table with a sign that says, Pat Connaughton is Michael Petrus, prove me wrong. But that's just my take on it.
I think just generally, too, the way that sort of, and again, we have to give credit to Mike Budenholzer and his staff for making some very intelligent adjustments through the final 4 games of the series, because there were a lot of people, and I've been out here in Portland, and there is a relatively high level of Phoenix contingency out here, and it looked like, judging from those first 2 games, that they were in control, and not that they were necessarily going to run away with the series, but they were going to be good enough at the end of the day to probably win it in 6 themselves. Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be a blow. And as I've said to you, I just recently made friends with a Phoenix Suns fan, and that dude must be feeling it right now because he was saying Suns in 4 ahead of time, and I can understand that. I mean, coming into the series, with Giannis looking like he was going to be iffy at best, but the way that he came through, I mean, it seems very, very clear to me that, especially, I mean, that 50-point game. In the deciding game here, tying the most in a series clinching finals game with Bob Pettit in 1958. The other games in the series, the third game with where he put up 40 and 10. I mean, this is going to go down as an all-time epic performance. So when you talk about the legendary players, what they do on the big stage, the way that we look back on what Giannis did here, I think is going to compare to anything we talk about with Jordan and Kobe and LeBron and anybody in their finals here, the way that he just asserted himself to such an insane degree.
I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'll say this, Rick. I think it's the greatest performance in a series-clinching game in playoff history at this point.
Very possibly. Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I mean, to get 50 points in a game that you know that you need to win. Like, we've discussed this off air and during the last one. So it's like, I still thought that Milwaukee, even if they blew it in Game 6, would have had at least a point-flip chance to win a Game 7 on the road. But in terms of coming up big when they needed to, and if you even just look down the line, Chris Middleton had a pretty average game, and pretty much Pat Connaughton in Game 6 couldn't hit anything. Milwaukee just kind of needed to lean on Giannis, and he played very well, and he was very aggressive, and that's the big key to Giannis at the end. If he can stay aggressive and get in the paint and get good quality shots and make his free throws, which was kind of the entire story leading into the playoffs, which he did with 17 out of 19. He pretty much dominated the game at the end of it, and it just felt like, even though Phoenix took a 5-point lead in the halftime, that Milwaukee still had the advantage. It just kind of felt like that's just how that game was going to play out.
Well, and this is the thing, too. What's truly remarkable about him doing it right here, right now, at this stage of his evolution is we've been waiting this whole time because his career has basically coincided with, because what you look at it probably when Steve Kerr got to Golden State in 2014, and this incarnation of the modern NBA and floor spacing and threes and whatever. And I think we've always thought, oh my God, once this guy becomes a threat from behind the arc, he'll be the most dominant thing ever. He's not at that point. He's not a threat behind the arc that you really have to respect any kind of a degree, and he's still doing this with the game the way that it is right now. That's remarkable, because I wouldn't have forecast that he would attain this level by going against the grain, but here he is.
Well, I mean, one point I do feel like we need to consider is that this is just sort of a experiential move almost, is that we saw this with Shaq in the early 2000s. He was pretty much damn near unstoppable when getting into the painted area, and that's what essentially Giannis has done because of his athleticism and his ability to get to the basket. It's really hard to find a guy who has his sort of length and ability to guard, because I'll even say this, is that looking at the great defenders in this league, there isn't a lot of them that could even match up with them. Like Kevin Durant's probably the closest, but I would say Giannis is a bit faster and a bit more rangier around the basket than even Durant is. So
true.
It's going to be very interesting to see how he moves forward. And one thing that we have to note too is this Milwaukee team is pretty much locked in for their contracts for the next couple of years. The Big Four essentially have their contracts extended for at least 2 to 3 more years. And the other big keys in this championship team, guys like Bobby Portis and Rick Forbes, who are essentially going to become free agents, will probably resign. So this team is going to definitely have another shot at a title in the Eastern Conference and over the next 2 to 4 years. Because if we're being brutally honest, we still do not know how the Nets are going to pan out. We don't know if Philly's going to trade Ben Simmons, and we still have that big question mark if will Trae Young and the Hawks get there after overachieving this season.
Absolutely, and I do want to take a little bit of a look ahead at Milwaukee's chances for getting another title here once we bring this thing all the way around. But a few more notes on the series itself. In looking at some of the most impressive moments, individual moments over the course of finals in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, and again, there's a couple of them. I, as a Cavs fan, I'm going to say the shot, the block, and the stop, certainly from 2016, that trifecta. The big shot hit by Ray Allen in, 2013, I think. You go on and on and on. The play that was made by Drew Holiday and then lobbing it up to Giannis there at the end, I mean, that's got to go on that short list, right? If you're making a highlight reel of the greatest moments in NBA Finals history, that's the one from this series, and that's one of the ones from the last several years. Maybe the greatest one we've seen since 2016 of a moment in the finals that just makes you go, whoa, holy crap.
Right, and I think the sort of the just level of that point to that is going to be not of that point, excuse me, but of that play is going to just be even remembered even more. Is that Drew Holiday technically didn't even need to throw that pass at that point. He could have dribbled it out and gone fouled.
Yes.
But he knew what was going on. He knew the situation. And essentially, even though Giannis missed that free throw, they were able to keep possession and essentially force another possession out of it. So, and I think it was a very heady, very smart play from a very high-quality player who I feel like, let's be honest, I don't think adequately gets his due for what he's able to do on the floor. He probably, at this point, is the best perimeter defender in basketball.
Probably.
In terms of at the guard position. And he deserves a lot of credit for this victory because I'll be honest, if we want to retroactively push Eric Bledsoe in there, I'm not necessarily sure that the result would be the same.
Well, again, I agree with you. In fact, I'll go further and say I don't think the result would have been the same because, again, I'm like a lot of people where I scratch my head looking at this because Milwaukee really underachieved the last two seasons in the playoffs. Last year going out in the first freaking round to Miami, and then 2 years ago blowing the 2-0 lead against Toronto. Again, as you said before, and that was one of the things where I just felt like coming into this, they had a lot to prove as far as that goes. And you gave me the other side of the coin, which was that Phoenix was unproven at this level, which they ended up showing, I think, in the end. My thought was, yeah, but over the last 12 calendar months, they've been just about unstoppable. Going back to the bubble, you add Chris Paul to this team, a team that a lot of us didn't even pick as a playoff team, ends up being the number 2 seed in the West. They were just on an incredible run that went all the way up to Game 3 in Milwaukee. And then even that was a thing where Milwaukee's back was to the wall. I don't think any of us thought this was going to be a short series if Giannis was in there and playing well. I think a lot of us thought it could have been a short series if he wasn't himself, essentially, or wasn't even playing. But you expect Milwaukee to win Game 3. Pissing away Game 4 the way that they did, I agree with you. That was a real turning point there. And then, again, at no point in Game 6 did Phoenix feel like they were ever really on the verge of coming back and taking control of it. They were struggling just to kind of stay close. And then basically just kind of ran out of time at the end there because they weren't able to make any kind of a run. And this is something that is going to shape a lot of legacies coming out of this here. Giannis definitely, taking that step into the stratosphere of not just, he already was there for present day NBA stars, but now this is all time. He etches his name all time as a superstar by doing this. Chris Paul, unfortunately, coming up short. That just reinforces a narrative about him. He's become the first player in NBA playoff history to lose 4 series where his team was up 2-0. You can't put all of that on him, but some of that's going to reflect on him, unfortunately. Coach Bud, that's a guy that, again, even when things are going well, maybe it's his demeanor where he just always looks confused. But, he definitely takes a step up here historically as far as how he's gone. So the outcome of this series and the way that it went, really, again, some of these folks are going to have a chance to redeem themselves in the history books, and maybe Chris Paul get another look at it. But some players took a big step forward in a way where you can never take it away from them, and some other ones like Chris Paul and some of the other figures in this thing still have something to prove.
Right, and for especially with Phoenix, outside of Chris Paul, they still have a very healthy championship window. People tend to forget Devin Booker's under 26.
They do.
Dean is under 24.
Yes.
And Mikal Bridges, another guy who played well in the series for Phoenix, he's also under 25. So at the end of the day, Phoenix is going to have a bunch of chances at the apple again. And it's going to come down to ultimately if Phoenix can sort of hedge and get maybe their point guard of the future or someone else to come in to determine what is going to be the best for them. One thing that I was a little puzzled by at periods of time was from Monty Williams, even though I thought he did a relatively good to great coaching job in the playoffs, is I was kind of expecting maybe to see a little bit of a solid 2-guard lineup with him with Paul and Champagne on the floor, but that never really materialized at any point. Maybe trying to push some tempo, push some pace a little bit more. But it's just going to be very interesting for Phoenix because this was a team, and we all tend to forget this, is that literally only 3 seasons ago they won only 18 games.
Oh, yeah.
Or 19 games, whatever the exact number is at that point. So they're now a very healthy-looking team in the West, in a very, very packed but highly tempoed Western Conference. And if you just kind of look at what Phoenix will be able to do in the coming months, it's going to be an attractive destination for a lot of players. So
it's going to be.
I would say if I'm a Phoenix fan, I'm not really too saddened by this loss. There's a lot of future potential with this franchise and this team moving forward.
There is. I think Chris Paul's going to be back, but I think he's going to probably opt out to try to get a longer deal, and that is a smart move for him at this point here, and that gives them their best chance of bringing it home in the next 1 to 3 years. But with Milwaukee, at least they beat a Phoenix team in the finals that was at full strength, because, again, the story of these playoffs writ large was all of the teams that woulda, coulda, shoulda been ultimate title contenders that were derailed by key injuries. Both LA teams, Brooklyn, those were the three strong favorites, I thought, coming into this thing. And again, they'll all be back next year. So for Milwaukee, I'm not going to say that there's any kind of an asterisk on this. I'm not going to go there. But it's going to be a thing where I think, to me, they're still going to have to prove something the next couple of years by going through some of these really star-laden teams to get there. Because let's face it, if Kevin Durant was paying better attention to where his foot was on the three-point line, Brooklyn might have closed them out anyways, even without Kyrie Irving. So it's a situation where the next couple of years, and I think it's going to be very, very exciting, because you have teams like Atlanta and Phoenix that are really on the brink, and you go beyond that, Denver, Dallas, but you've still got, again, Lakers, Clippers, Nets. Like the next 2 to 3 years, Ben, I think it could be one of the most exciting periods in NBA history, because you could have 10 legitimate title contenders, and we're just not used to seeing that.
Right, and I think that's going to be very interesting to see overall. But at the end of the day, I mean, for Milwaukee, the important part is just to claim a championship, because we always make these analysis points, Rick, about, what was the field in front of them, blah, blah, blah. But most of the time, if I'm being brutally honest, no one ever really cares about the road to the finals at that point. You don't usually grade on a curve in these sort of scenarios.
Right.
But for Milwaukee to get this team to very similar to what the LeBron-era Cavs were, which was essentially one title, to another upper echelon type legendary team, they're going to need to at least fill out their success. And it's going to be interesting to see where they kind of look forward to, because we have to remember, too, is that normally what I would say is that they would be building mainly for free agency in the draft, but they don't have a lot of picks remaining at this current time, and they're going to have to possibly pony up more money to keep free agents in Milwaukee. So it's going to be very interesting to see what their sort of landscape is moving forward. But they have a really big golden opportunity, because I don't really think there's any team outside of maybe the Nets that are going to be that big of a problem for the Bucks moving forward.
Well, that, at least in the next year or so, I think that'll be the case. Now, one of the big questions is, to me, Atlanta, because the thing that separates, in my mind, Atlanta and Phoenix is that Phoenix got Chris Paul, and again, not that Atlanta needed him because they had Trae Young, but that veteran piece, that star veteran piece. I think if you were to take an externality like that, put it in Atlanta, they become part of that conversation immediately. But it seems like they're one player of that magnitude away, because at the end of the day, they just looked like the young team that they are at the end of the East Finals against Milwaukee.
Right, and I think we have to give Atlanta a lot of credit for getting to where they were. And I mean, you have to remember, there were a lot of points in this series where they dealt with injuries to Trae Young, and they still had guys who were still on the member. Remember, Bogdanovich had his injury issues during this timeline, and we still truly didn't get to see that team at full strength either. DeAndre Hunter was out for most of the Eastern Conference playoffs, and we still don't know what they have in Cam Reddish either. So they're going to be a very interesting foe moving forward for teams like Milwaukee and Brooklyn and and we also tend to forget, too, Rick, there's a lot of other mid-tier teams right now. Teams like the Knicks, teams like the Knicks, teams like the Blazers, teams like, I know Minnesota has been absolute dog crap for the last couple of seasons, but they have a really good core now with Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, and D'Angelo Russell, that they could become a threat if they can come under Chris Finch. So it seems like to me there's a lot of talent spread out throughout the league. And because of that, there's not necessarily a guarantee that Milwaukee is going to be in their best position to repeat. But at this point, the one thing I would feel I can be honest with is that with Coach Bud and with that franchise, that they have a very healthy franchise. They have a lot of great ownership there. So there's a lot of money, and I'm pretty sure they'll be willing to spend in this case to keep a championship contender going.
Yeah.
Overall.
And that's very important. By the way, when we're talking about teams here over the next couple of years, not to be that guy who sits here in gravy trains, but let's say you take an Evan Mobley and insert him on the North Coast. You could be talking about one more possible contender in there, dare we say.
Or if I like to say at the end of the day, this is not a Cleveland Cavaliers podcast, but hey, it's close enough.
Well, I'm a lifelong Cavaliers honk, so you're going to have that element to be sure. But yeah, it was a very, very exciting and interesting finals here. The last note that I have is that we talked about this during the finals, that it's relatively rare that you get something like a Game 5 where it's 2-2. And the Game 5 many times, of course, ends up being decisive, as it was here. So you had to go back a number of years for that to be the case. In 2016, there was a Game 5 under those circumstances, or 2015, I should say. And that was one where Game 4 was really the hinge game, because I think Steve Kerr kind of gone into that Soma coma and let the Cavs get the 2 wins there. And my good friend, FDH Lounge original dignitary Chris Galloway, was at Game 4, and I told him going in, I said, if we take this tonight, we're going to win the series. If we don't, it's over, because they're just going to steamroll past us. So to me, Game 4 was the hinge of that series, not Game 5. But generally, Game 5, when it's 2-2, is a big hinge game. I think it happened in 2013, and I think it happened in 2011 as well. So there hadn't been as much of that in recent years, and we did get to see that in this series, of where, there is a super decisive game within the series that is not the deciding game itself.
Right, and I think too is that it's in recent history too. We'll know, Rick, is that just with teams coming back from a 2-0 deficit in the finals, only 3 teams in the history of the league have even done that. If we include the Bucks, is that it's really hard for a team to blow a 2-0 lead in the finals only with this current formatting of 2-2, 1-1-1.
Right,
because you're guaranteed that extra Game 7 at home. And the reason why I kind of felt like that, one of the reasons why I felt I was a little bit sold on Milwaukee winning this series is that I felt there was a higher probability that the Suns could have a letdown in Game 1, 2, or 5, just because of just the amount of energy that they put forth in the Clippers series more than what the Bucks had to do to dispatch the Atlanta Hawks.
right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The road to the finals is always one that is very indicative that you have to look at. And again, it's the end of a long road for both of these teams, and it ends up being a triumphant one for Milwaukee. So congratulations to the Milwaukee Bucks. And for Phoenix, again, it's a tough break, but very close, and there's no reason that they can't be back here next year, albeit the road is going to be, as we say, a lot tougher if the top teams in the West are healthier at this time of year next year. So we shall see. But Ben Chu, my good friend, always a pleasure breaking this down. Congratulations yet again. 7 for 7 in making your finals predictions on this show. You've called your shot every time successfully.
You see, now I just feel like there's a jinx, and I'm not going to get to go 8 for 8 now. You see, this is a problem now. I'm now concerned, but it's been a good run so far. We'll see if we can make it 8 of 8 next season.
We shall see. I have confidence in you, my friend. I was there on a couple of them. I'm as we sit here, I'm 5-2 over that span, which is still pretty good. But like I said, I only went against the grain once. You went against the grain 3 times, and that's the reason that you were able to make it happen. So congratulations to you, Ben Chu. Thank you for being here for us for another great